In the deepest heart of winter, long before modern heating, weather forecasts, or insulated walls, there came a night so unnaturally cold that it slipped into history almost unnoticed at first. Not because it was small or unimportant, but because those who experienced it did not live long enough to describe it fully, and the cold itself did not announce its rival with storms or roaring winds, but arrived quietly, patiently, like a presence that did not need to be seen to be felt, settling over valleys, towns, and scattered villages as dusk fell and daylight retreated behind a pale, exhausted sun, and people, unaware of what was approaching, continued their routines as they always had, closing wooden shutters, feeding animals, banking fires low to preserve fuel, wrapping themselves in layers of wool and linen, worn thin by years of use, believing that the night would pass as countless nights before it had done, because winter had always been harsh, but never unforgiving enough to erase entire communities in a single breathless span of darkness. And as the sky darkened into a deep, glassy blue, temperatures began to fall with a speed that no one could measure and no one could feel immediately, because the first stage of deadly cold is subtle, deceptive, almost gentle numbing fingers slowly tightening lungs just enough to be dismissed, and in homes built of stone and timber, warmth began to retreat inward, shrinking closer to the hearths where embers glowed faintly like dying stars. And as families gathered to sleep, bodies closed together for comfort, laughter faded into whispers, whispers into breathing, and breathing into sleep, while outside the cold pressed forward, not like an invading army, but like water seeping through cracks, patient and inevitable. And somewhere beyond the villages, rivers began to stiffen, their surfaces tightening into fragile skins of ice. Animals sought shelter instinctively, burrowing, huddling, curling inward as if sensing what humans could not yet understand. And by the time midnight arrived, the air itself had changed, becoming heavier, sharper, each breath drawing cold deeper into the chest, slowing the rhythm of the body without pain, without warning. And in one small house at the edge of a frozen field, a mother slept, with her children pressed against her, believing the weight and warmth of their bodies would protect them, unaware that hypothermia does not strike with violence, but with calm, lowering the heart's pace, dulling sensation, replacing discomfort with a dangerous sense of peace. And across the village, fires burn lower than intended, embers collapsing into ash as oxygen, thin and heat escape through walls never designed to hold it, and candles went out not from wind, but from cold so intense that flame itself could no longer sustain its fragile existence, leaving rooms lit only by moonlight filtering through frost-coated windows. And as the night deepened further afar, Oast bloomed across interior walls like pale flowers, intricate and silent, creeping over furniture, climbing door frames, ceiling cracks, that once allowed warmth to pass between rooms, and those still awake felt an overwhelming heaviness settle over their limbs, eyelids growing impossibly heavy, thoughts slowing into gentle fragments, and many, believing sleep to be a refuge, allowed themselves to drift, unaware that in such cold, sleep was not rest but surrender, and outside, the world grew unnaturally still. Snowflakes freezing midair and falling like fine dust. Branches snapping softly under the weight of sudden ice. Birds dropping silently from trees as their bodies could no longer maintain warmth, landing on the snow as if placed there with care. And in the darkest hours, before dawn, the cold reached its peak, temperatures plunging to levels unseen in living memory. Driven by atmospheric shifts historians would later debate, but never fully explain. And in that moment, thousands of lives slowed together, heartbeats weakening in unison across entire regions, not in panic, not in pain, but in quiet resignation, faces relaxing, muscles loosening, as consciousness faded into something deeper than sleep. And when morning finally arrived, it came gently, sunlight reflecting off frozen landscapes with a deceptive beauty, illuminating rooftops, fields, and roads preserved exactly as they had been left the night before, and touched, pristine and silent. And when the first survivors emerged, those whose fires had burned slightly longer or whose shelters had held warmth just enough, they stepped into a world that felt wrong in ways words could not yet describe, calling out names that echoed unanswered, opening doors to rooms frozen solid, beds undisturbed, meals left half prepared, and bodies lying exactly as they had fallen asleep, expressions calm, almost peaceful, as if the night itself had tucked them and never let them go. And across towns and villages, the same scene repeated with unbearable consistency. Entire families gone, streets emptied, workshops, silent, livestock frozen in place, and those left alive moved through the aftermath in stunned silence, unsure whether to speak, pray, or simply stand still, because sound itself felt inappropriate in a world so thoroughly claimed by cold, and burial became a task nearly impossible. Ground frozen harder, thin stone tools ringing uselessly against earth that refused to open, forcing survivors to stack bodies in sheltered places, wrapped in cloth, waiting for thaw that might not come for weeks. And chroniclers of the time would later write of that winter with shaking hands, describing how even the strongest perished, how age offered no protection, how wealth and poverty froze alike, and how the cold seemed almost selective in its mercy, sparing a few, not because they deserved survival, but because chance allowed it. And as days turned into weeks, the scale of the loss became impossible to ignore. Trade halted, churches filled beyond capacity with the dead, bells ringing not in celebration, but in endless mourning, until their sound itself became a symbol of despair. And yet, As months passed and seasons eventually shifted, memory began its slow erosion. Numbers blurred, stories shortened, the night compressed into a paragraph, then a sentence, then a footnote, because history has little patience for suffering that leaves no monuments behind. And yet, beneath the surface of recorded events, that night remains, a reminder of how fragile warmth truly is, how thin the line between rest and oblivion can be. And as you listen now, wrapped in safety, surrounded by steady temperature and quiet light, let this story drift not as fear, but as distance, as something that has passed, something that belongs to another time, another world, where the night came colder than anyone expected and sleep became deeper than anyone intended. And as your breathing slows and the present moment grows softer, remember that this silence is different, that it is chosen, controlled, and safe, and that unlike those who lay down unaware, you will wake again, rested, warm, and untouched by the cold that once claimed thousands in a single, unforgettable night.